Hi ladies, I am super excited to be here with you today. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jade Spencer. I am Pastor Rhonda's daughter-in-law. I am married to Chad, and him and I are the young adults pastors here at his Tabernacle Family Church, and I get to share with you today, which is kind of weird because usually I'm on the other side of the screen watching with all of you, but I get to be on this side today. So I'm excited, but I just want to give a special shout out. I actually have Pastor Rhonda in the room with me watching, and I want to thank her for allowing me to do this. And then a shout out to my mom. So I have both my moms watching today, so I'm definitely feeling the pressure, but I'm really excited because I have a message that I heard a couple weeks ago, and it impacted me in such a way that for the past couple weeks I've really been meditating on it, wanting to know, how can I implement it in my life? How can I make it real to me? And now I really want to share it because I think it's powerful and I think it's relevant for today. So I'm super excited, and I know you saw the title, just to say it again, it's called Set Her Up to Win, and that's really what I'm going to go into today. So Pastor Charlotte Gamble, she is a dynamic preacher. She is originally from the UK, but she travels around. She has an itinerant ministry as well as pastoring a home church with her husband, and she gave a message, and this is actually where I'm taking this from. And in this message, she talks about a time in her life that was one of the darkest times, but it's where she really learned what it is that she wants to do. She was 19 years old. She actually was the daughter of the pastors of the church. And for, her whole teenage life, she had nothing. She didn't want anything to do with really the ministry. She had no interest in sharing the word. She knew she had a call of God in her life, but she didn't have an interest in it. Well, finally, when she was around 18, 19, she decided, now's the time. Now's the time I really want to step into what it is that God has for me. Well, she was put into a position of leadership where she was going to be leading a group. She was going to be leading kind of like a connect group, small group. And so what happened was they gathered all the ladies of the church together, and Charlotte was going to get up to share her heart and what it is that she believed God had imparted to her for this connect group. Now, granted, she was about 19 years old, and she's in a room full of older, more mature women. So she gets up there, and she said she was so nervous, but she knew that she had to share. And she said she could feel, when you get that red rash that kind of climbs the nervous one, and she could feel it. And so she started fumbling her way through her notes and what it is that she wanted to share. And she said a couple rows back, she could hear some of the older ladies, there was mumbling, and she thought, yes, someone's going to give me an amen about now. I need an amen. I need an encouragement. Well, that's not what happened. One of the ladies stood up, and she actually was one of the elders' wives. And she stood up and she said, if you're going to lead the group, we're not going to be part of it. And she stood up, and 4 of them stood up and they walked out. 2 of those women were actually the elders' wives in the ministry. And Charlotte said she stood there and had no idea what to say next. She said she could not wish that experience on anybody. She felt completely rejected. She felt completely discouraged because an older woman had basically put her down. And that's really what I want to talk about today, because we have a place in this life. We've been purposed to write a story. And each of us have our own story, but they all combine to do one great story that tells of God's goodness, his faithfulness, his mercy, his deliverance. But we each have a part to play. We each have a story to write. But the question really comes is, are we setting somebody else to win in their story? Because it's great to have our own story, but are we helping somebody else with theirs? And in that moment, she said, those women didn't set me up to win. They set me up to fail. And she said in that time, she stood there and she prayed and she said, God, I never want to be that way. I want to set someone else to win. I never want to be somebody that has my own agenda or is jealous because of a position or because of favor. I want to set someone else to win. And that's really what I want to talk about today, because I think that's so relevant. We live in a society today of competition. In the church world, there is so much competition going on. There's a generational gap between the older, mature generation and the young, inexperienced generation. But God's calling us to come together as one so that we can write a great story that brings his glory, his salvation to those who need to know about it. And as women, it's very easy for us to compare or to compete or to feel incredibly threatened. And that's not what God's calling, because that's not what brings success. And see, the devil knows that. And so what he does is he makes it very hard, because he knows the Bible says that where there's unity, God commands his blessing. And so it's easier not to encourage someone. It's easier to be threatened by somebody. But again, where there is unity, God commands his blessings. And when you look in the Bible, honestly, it's actually kind of hard to find stories of somebody setting someone else up to win. It's very easy to find stories of people setting others up to fail. Look at David. When David came out to be looked at by the prophet, his brothers looked at him like, "What are you doing, little boy? Who are you?" When David showed up at the battle ready to fight, his brothers looked at, "Go home. This is not where you belong." He was overlooked. Joseph, his brothers hated him because their father loved him. He was completely overlooked. He was not set up to win. And so there's example after example of people not being set up to win. And I'm not just talking about the younger generation being set up to win. I'm even talking about the older generation feeling like they have nothing left to give. But their story isn't over. Your story isn't over. You have so much more to write. And there's a generation that needs you. So I'm excited. And I just want you to take a moment and think about those around you. Think about who's in your sphere of influence. Maybe your spouse, your friends. If you pastor a church, your congregation or your leaders behind you. If you're within a church, your pastor or your leaders. Imagine if everybody around you was setting you up to win. They were rooting you on. They were encouraging you. How much bigger would your dreams be? How many more mountains would you climb? How many more giants would you slay? Because you were being set up to win. You were being rooted on. You can do it. I know it gets tough, but you can do it. It changes everything. When you set somebody else up to win, everything changes. And so what's so cool is in the Bible, I did find a story where somebody set someone else to win, and that was for the greater good. And this story is the story of Ruth and Naomi. And what I love so much about this story is that it's a beautiful picture of what the church should look like today. It's an awesome picture of how the older generation rooted on the younger generation, and the younger generation stepped up to help the older generation. And in turn, great things happened. And so if we look at in the beginning of the book of Ruth, Naomi's life, Naomi had experienced death like no other. Her husband had died. Her sons had died. She felt loss. She felt pain. In fact, we actually see that she renamed herself Bitter. That's what she renamed herself. Don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Bitter, because that is what's happened to me. And so this woman's life was just full of pain and hurt and loss. But in comes Ruth, her young daughter-in-law, who had words of life, words of encouragement, that she was going to change Naomi's story. She wasn't willing to see Naomi quit and give up and sit back and not do anything. Ruth came in with words in her mouth. And I want to tell you today that you have words in your mouth to set someone else up to win. You have words in your mouth to stop someone from quitting, to get them to do what God's calling them to do, to encourage them, to push them. And that's what we're going to see in the story. But what you have to do is you have to speak them out. I've learned so many times it's easy for me to think great things in my head, but it's another thing for me to make them verbal or to speak them out. Often I think great things about other people. I compliment people all the time in my head, but it's very rare that I'll actually say it out. But somebody needs to hear the words of life that you have in your mouth. Somebody needs to hear the word of encouragement. Somebody needs to know that you're rooting them on. There's been so many times that I've just needed to hear that I'm doing a good job. I've just needed to hear that I shouldn't quit. I just need to hear, that I am fulfilling what God has for me. And I'm so thankful for the person who spoke those words out. Now I want to be that person. And this was who Ruth was to Naomi. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive into what the word says. And we're going to look in Ruth 1 verse 8. And we see, I'm going to read while I'm here. But on the way, Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and me." See, Naomi, what's so interesting about this is even though Naomi was in the hardest saddest, most painful spot in her life. The time where she actually needed her daughter-in-laws the most, she wanted to set them up to win. She didn't want them to stay with her in her sadness. She wanted them to go and write their own story. She said, I don't have more sons for you. Go back. Go find yourself a home. Go write a story. And that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to set them up to win. But I love what Ruth said. Ruth looked at her and she said she was going to cling to her. Ruth said, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. Now imagine how Naomi's feeling right now. She's feeling sad. She's feeling like there's no hope, but her hopelessness is being responded with, wherever you go, I'll go. Her pain is being responded with, wherever you stay, I'll stay. Her loneliness is being responded, whoever your people are will be my people. See, Ruth spoke out words of life to Naomi. She wasn't willing to let Naomi sign off on her story. Her story wasn't over yet, and Ruth wasn't going to leave her. Ruth was going to set her up to win. She spoke words of commitment to her. Are you speaking words of commitment? Am I speaking words of commitment? What does that mean? That means it's easy to tell somebody, I'll help you, but it's another thing to actually follow through with that. It's one thing to tell somebody, I want to set you up to win, but it's another thing to provide them with the resources that they would need to succeed. See, when we speak words of commitment, it means that we're there for the long run. I'm going to help you. I'm going to push you. I'm going to see that you get everything that God's called you to do. So Ruth spoke words of commitment. Then we move on in the story, and Ruth told Naomi, well, you rest, and I'm going to go and work. I'm going to go and get us food. So Naomi rested, and Ruth went out into the fields, and she found herself in a field of favor. What I love about this is that the fact that Ruth went and worked. See, when you are setting others up to win and you're going out to gather, you're not just gathering for yourself, you're gathering for everybody else. And that's what Ruth was doing. She was going to provide for her and Naomi. And so she found herself in this field where there was a certain gentleman who noticed her. And we see in Ruth 2, verse 10 to 12, she's going to fall at his feet. And the reason is because he had complete favor on her. He gave her everything that she needed, and she couldn't understand quite yet why he was doing it. We read it and we know, well, she was reaping what she was sowing. She was being rewarded for what she had done to stay by Naomi. But this is what Boaz is going to tell her. So in verse 10, Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. What have I done to deserve such kindness? She asked. I am only a foreigner. Yes, I know, Boaz replied, but I also know that everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I've heard how you left your father and your mother and your own land to live among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. She was setting someone else up to win, but in return was being set up to win. Some of you are listening, and maybe, some of you are listening and you're Naomi, or some of you are listening and you are Ruth. I don't know which one you are, but maybe you identify with one of them. And what I want to tell you is that if you're watching this and you're feeling like your story is over, and I'm probably talking to the more mature women who are watching this, maybe you're kind of, life, you've done ministry, you've had your experience, you've been through things, and now you kind of feel like it's time for the younger generation to stand up. And so with that, you're kind of signing off on your story. I want to tell you that if you're still here, you still have something to say. We need you. This young generation that I'm a part of, we need your wisdom. We need what it is that you've been through. Your story is not over. And I think that's a lot of the problem is what happens is why we don't see in the church world younger generation being set up to win is that because an older generation tends to check out. Because, honestly, sometimes you can't blame them. I know a lot of times, the older generation feels like, well, the younger generation, they're taking over now. We don't like their music. We don't like the way they dress. They jump around too much. And, that's okay. But you have a voice of wisdom that is still valid today. You have been through things that this younger generation has never been through. And if we get to hear what it is that you've been through, you could save us from years of hurt, years of issues, because we heed ourselves to the voice of wisdom. So I want you to know that you still have a story. Your story isn't over. There's no period at the end of the sentence yet. There's so much more. So we see in the story that after Ruth finds some favor from Boaz and, he starts to give her a little bit of more grain than anybody else, Naomi tells Ruth, he said, he likes you. Naomi's kind of like, I'm older and I'm wiser, so I know these things. And so she decides it's time for me to set you up to win. And so she tells Ruth, this is how you need to dress. This is what you need to say. This is where you need to go. This is what you need to do. She sets Ruth up to win. She begins to position herself in a way that she can be a voice of wisdom to Ruth. Ruth had spent time building her up, and now it was time for Naomi to set Ruth up. Are you positioned to set someone else to win? It's very easy, I've learned it's very, very easy for me to feel that I don't want to set someone else to win because I want to win. But what I've had to learn is that in me setting someone else up to win, I'm going to win too, because I'm going to get to share in that victory. I want to just say to the older ladies, that there are young women that need your voice. And when I say old, I promise I don't mean old. I just mean more mature. I can see Pastor Rhonda giggling. But there are younger women that they need your voice. They've been void of a voice of wisdom in their life. They need to be set up to win. They need to be told, I can help you. I'm going to stand with you. I'm going to hold your hand through everything. And younger ladies, there's mature women who you need to heed yourself to, who've been through things that you've never been through, who know things that you don't know, and who can set you up to win. So there's really a part to play for all of us. But this has become really rare in the house of God. We all kind of feel, well, I'll do this and I'll do this, but we don't really set each other up to win. There's a lot of young women. Man, I think about myself when I was younger, and I'm so thankful that I had godly women who looked past the little shorts that I would wear to church, and who looked past the attitude that I would throw out, and look past all of that and say to me, there's something in you, there's a gift of God on you, and I want you to achieve it. So here, I'm going to help you. I'm going to share with you what the Word of God says. We're going to walk this road together. Because, I'm just going to speak to the young woman. Your young friends are not a voice of wisdom to you. They are just as inexperienced as you. So young ladies, heed yourself, listen to what the older women have to say. And to the mature women, I promise you, our inexperienced friends are not a voice of wisdom to us. You are a voice of wisdom to us. And so we want to hear what it is that you have to say. A lot of the times, what happens is that, maybe the younger girls feel intimidated, or they feel, overlooked. They don't want a tut-tut wagging finger of judgment towards them, but they want to, when they hear, I want you to succeed and I want you to win, it changes their perception, and they want to listen. They want to hear what you have to say. It's so important. In the book of Titus, older women are admonished to tell the younger women, to teach them to love their husbands, to teach them to submit, to teach them to keep a house. There's a reason for that. If we're not taught, we don't know. And society is nothing to go by. What happens in the world today is nothing to go by. We need the voice of wisdom in our life. Your story is not over. So if we go to Ruth 4:17, and I love this part. Also, the neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Here's what's interesting. it says that Naomi had a son, but Naomi didn't have a son. Ruth had a son. But you see, when you set somebody else up to win, their victory is your victory, and your victory is their victory. And so I just kind of want to just talk about a personal story in my life where I've really witnessed how this can harm you. I have a family member who, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do have a family member who was operating in a position in the ministry. And she did a phenomenal job. She grew this area. She did incredible. But basically, the time came for her to transition out and for the younger generation to transition in. And with that came much restraint and much feeling of competition and much feeling of feeling very, very threatened. And so instead of passing the baton on to the younger generation and saying, I will be here for you, I will unload the vats of my wisdom to set you up to win, whatever you need, I will give you. I want to see the success. She allowed competition to take root in her heart and bitterness to take root in her heart. And it was the worst transition. And so the younger generation came in, and they've done a phenomenal job, and this area of ministry has just exploded and is amazing. But I wonder how much better it would be had that individual poured out all of her wisdom. How much hurt would they not need to go through if they had been pre-warned? How many creative ideas had they been given? How much better would it be? Yes, it's great, but I really think, man, there could have been so much more had the older generation set the younger generation up to win. And I promise I'm not beating at the older generation. The younger generation has done a really good job of separating themselves. They've done a really good job of allowing pride to take root in their hearts where they don't need help, they don't need wisdom. But God has created in his great plan. He's a generational God. He goes from generation to generation to generation. And with that, he expects a smooth transition. How? By setting each other up to win. So I just want to encourage you today. I know maybe today was a little bit shorter than usual, but I want to encourage you that when you set someone else up to win, their victory is your victory. To the young woman watching, say to your moms, say to your grandmothers, say to the older women in the church, your story's not over. I need to hear what you have to say. Encourage them that now's not the time for them to quit, but now's the time that you need them more than anything. And to the more mature woman watching, there are so many young girls in the ministry who are void of wisdom, like I said earlier. And like I said again, they don't want a finger wagging, but they want someone to say, honey, I want to help you. I want to set you up to win. And it doesn't have to be everybody. Maybe there's just one girl that you notice that you could take under your wing. I want to encourage you to do it. I am a product of women, godly women investing in me, and I want the same for everybody else. Jealousy and competition and being threatened is not part of God's kingdom. And so if we want God's kingdom here on earth, that can't be part of our daily life. So I just want to encourage you. I want to thank you so much for watching today. I really hope you got something out of it. I enjoyed it. Man, this has impacted my life. It's impacted the way I see things. It's impacted the way I view my leadership. It's impacted the way I then lead. And so I'm very excited. There's nothing better than a legacy. And when you set someone else to win, you leave a legacy because it's smoothly transition. So I love you. I'm excited that you joined today. I want to thank again Pastor Rhonda for the opportunity. This was fun. And I hope to see you again soon. Love you all.